So, good morning, Professor. Welcome to Pax Europiana. Thanks for accepting to speak to our audience this morning. I'm very honored to welcome a very prominent personality for European transition, the former Minister of Finance from Slovenia. It's today the 1st of May. That's a very special day, obviously, the celebration of EU enlargement. And we will discuss this morning with you actually have been twice Minister of Finance from 2002 to 2004, and also then from 2012 to 14. And that's really very excellent that you take time. And I also would like to say that you are a very distinguished professor of macroeconomic finance from the University of Ljubljana. You worked in the US as well, and you had every single position in economic governance in Slovenia, from the capital markets to the privatization process. I'm very honored that you take time this morning, Professor, and please introduce yourself to the international audience. Thanks a lot, please.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure actually on this day. Actually, on the 4th of May was our entry to the European Union in 2004. Okay, I'm still employed, although I have already fulfilled everything that is necessary for retirement, but I wouldn't like to retire yet. So my master's degree was in monetary economics and my PhD in finance theory. My first job was actually credit officer in the bank, where I had to stay 2 years before my mentor at the university let me enter as a teaching assistant to the university, to the Faculty of Economics, where I am still employed. I served as assistant dean and dean for 10 years. And then I was also chairman of board of Ljubljana University for 6 years. Of course, for transition, somebody would say, okay, this is leading academic institutions, but I must say that I learned a lot because being a dean is really difficult position. They say that it's even the second most difficult managerial position because everybody is, of course, smarter than you are. So leading the institution into one direction is difficult. So I learned a lot with these positions, and I used that extensively when I was in parallel. More or less all my functions were in parallel, because I was teaching at the same time as I was actually, let's say, on the board of businesses, banks. I was first the Security and Exchange Commission of Slovenia chairman for 5 years. And in the government, I was advisor on advisory boards for the president or for the prime minister, finance minister, or the president of republic. My area of expertise is, as you already mentioned, economic policy, financial markets, let's say valuation. That's really theoretically very challenging topic in transition economies. And credit analysis, I would say that these 4 areas are my most important ones. I would like to say that actually, living in these times, for me, it was very exciting life. And it offered me a lot of opportunities to contribute and to serve. Let's say when we started our school, where I spent most of my time, was local socialist school, even based somewhere which was not the main town of the country. But now we came to be internationally important school and ranked at Financial Times. So at the same time, we were developing actually everything what was necessary for the new country and changing economic system. One of my colleagues, actually, Skip McGowan from the United States, who is visiting our school all the time, said, while we were theorizing on some issues in finance or economics, you were building a country. And it's true, it was a very exciting period.
Professor, I'm very honored that you take time and discuss with us. You are, in a way, a historic personality for the economic governance of Slovenia. But now let me take you back to the beginning, to the independence and to the first decade of reforms. It was, of course, 30 years ago. Slovenia became an independent country. How was the economic situation at the start of independence? What were the challenges, and how did you cope with this amazing transformation reform success which Slovenia has achieved?
Correct. It was extremely difficult situation at the beginning because, you know, we had everything on ourselves. So we had negative GDP growth, of course. We declared independence in 1991, but that caused a lot of problems. Let's say foreign exchange reserves were around 150 million German marks, which is nothing. If you think about it, this would be around 70, 80 million euros. And for a small open economy where the war started, we lost so many markets. There was a huge risk of insolvency, international insolvency. There was persistent supply side inflation because we had very strong monopolies from the government companies, especially in the areas of electricity, electric, or let's say energy, and so on. So this period at the beginning was extremely difficult and risky, but we knew we had very good people that actually the best human resources were employed at the Bank of Slovenia, at the Ministry of Finance, people from Faculty of Economics, also from Economic Institute of Law Faculty, and they were so smart in designing for this very unusual, specific situation, which is not the same as, let's say, in developed market economies. They were able to design economic policies that were having really good effects. So let's say already in the second half of 1993, we had a growth. So this negative GDP growth was there for a very short period of time. But of course, you know, we were building country at the same time as changing economic system, as being becoming independent from other parts of Yugoslavia, and it was completely unknown territory. I was, let's say, the chairman of the Security and Exchange Commission in this period for 5 years, and I must tell you, we were getting foreign advisors, like, let's say, Professor Paul Novak from Drury College in the United States. He came to Slovenia as a helper in our transition, and he was completely lost. He said, I said, okay, how do you determine, let's say, the riskiness of a company? And he said, that's simple. You just take beta. And I said, okay, beta, where do you get beta? And he said, there are beta books. You just look into beta book. He said, there's no beta books. He said, okay, then we will calculate them. And how do you calculate? On the basis of market data. I said, there's no market data for that, you know, and so on. So it was extremely difficult and really challenging time. It was, as I said, completely unknown territory, and people had their own ideas. What do you do in market economy? You know, so we experienced fraud. Investment funds were just, you know, manipulating. We had Wild West, let's say, on our capital markets, and we tried to sort of get everything under control. It was difficult, but at the same time, I must say, I enjoyed it tremendously because it was a challenge for the mind.
Professor, let me ask you about the legacy of Yugoslavian industrialization. Was there a lot of heavy industry left in Slovenia, and was it in a good condition, or in what kind of condition was this big industrial assets?
Yes, there were. Of course, we had aluminum factory, which was very big, and it was one of the biggest exporters. We had also steel production, let's say in the Jesenice area and some others. But that was, you know, in Slovenia, that was sort of balanced because we had a lot of electro products that we were producing, either for the final products or as suppliers, let's say for Germany and for Austria. We already were very international. Slovenia was exporting a lot, and Slovenia was competitive in this sense, but the consequence of this transition was, of course, that this heavy industry was sort of diminishing in percentage or in structure of industry, and other, let's say, especially the car parts or automotive parts were becoming more and more important in our, let's say, especially in foreign markets.
Professor, because I'm from Austria, let me ask you, and Slovenia is our southern neighbor, obviously, was there a lot of cooperation and trade with Austria? Was Austria a helpful partner for Slovenia during transition?
Oh yeah, definitely. Austria was practically number one or number two, depending on Germany and Austria, were very, very important economic partners for Slovenia. There's no question about it. And the Austrians were the most important in investing into our economy and also in privatization processes. So from this point of view, Austria was a neighbor, an important neighbor, very important neighbor.
Professor, the privatization process, how was it organized in Slovenia in the 90s?
Oh, that was from the point of view of the concept, it was a debate which would never stop. And we were very unhappy with what were the results. We didn't want to go into mass privatization. We wanted to give more into the hands of managers, which would be taking care about the companies. So we had sort of hybrid privatization, partly mass privatization, partly through investment funds, partly through distributing this ownership of companies among people in general. So it was a combination of everything. We were not going the same way as Czech Republic went and Czechoslovakia at that time. A bit more like Poland, sort of with slow steps, and we were criticized for that all the time.
So, Professor, Slovenia, this was a very successful period, the so-called Slovenian economic miracle, if we want to call it like that. It was really an enormous growth phase. And in 2002, you were also selected the Minister of Finance, preparing the EU membership of your country. Can you describe the challenges and what was the specific Slovenian reform model to be so successful in this first decade, in the first 15 years of transformation?
Yeah, you're right. The first period, let's say, I became, as you said, finance minister in 2002. So from independence to 2002, we had just, as I said, a small dip, which was ended in 1993. And then we had very high growth. We had low unemployment, rather balanced balance of payment. Budget was not, we didn't have big deficits in government, in public budget. We had very low public debt, around 27% of GDP at that time. So these were the positives, and I would say that mainly these positives should be credited to Bank of Slovenia with the best economists we had on the board there, and also the finance ministry with fantastic finance minister before me. So, but when we came, into the process to enter European Union, then the question was, are we harmonized well enough with the European Union that we will not lose our competitiveness and so on, let's say what happened in Greece and some other countries. So it was a big challenge actually to fulfill Maastricht criteria. Let's say inflation was really a big problem because it was a supply side and not demand side inflation, which was not able to be solved only by monetary policy. As you know, monetary policy can be efficient in demand side inflation, but not that much in supply side. So that was our big challenge. And if we wouldn't solve the problem of inflation, we wouldn't be able to enter ERM2 and then take over Euro in 2007. We would have to postpone that. So inflation was one of the targets, because inflation was much higher than what we would have to have in order to satisfy Maastricht criteria. Our interest rates were also much higher. So these two Maastricht criteria were not satisfied. At the same time, we were leading a policy of depreciating dollar to sort of balance our monetary policy. But then actually we had also problems with huge inflows of foreign exchange. You know that this inflow was up to 8% of GDP. And that was a big problem for the central bank, you know, how to neutralize its effect on our monetary policy and expansionary monetary money supply. So we had also overheated economy because of that, and a total disagreement with International Monetary Fund. I will tell you a story about it. It was a very interesting one. We completely disagreed what should be done. So these were my challenges. So how we attack those challenges, IMF actually required from us to fix the exchange rate and said, if you will fix the exchange rate, then this will be such a pressure that inflation will come down. But we said, if we do that, we will have complete other disbalances. Let's say balance of payment will change and so on. So this agreement was so big that when I went in 2003 at that time, the governor of a central bank to IMF meeting in Washington, we had scheduled meeting with the European department at IMF chief. It was Mr. Deppler at that time. And he was so angry at our policies because they were not fixing the exchange rate that he wouldn't accept us. He just canceled the meeting. We were having a meeting with his secretary my minister and the governor of an independent country. We were sitting with the secretary there. He rushed in and he said, "You Slovenians, you don't know what to do. You are completely wrong." And of course, the coordinated, restrictive fiscal policy and then monetary policy that we coordinated very, very closely, I would say. We were able actually to cool the economy with numerous measures, let's say like gasoline prices. We put a special model on it, following the market prices. We had talks with labor unions and we reduced actually increase of wages and so on. We had a lot of measures that helped, and we were down from 7.5% inflation, let's say when I took over in 2002, down to 2.5% in 3 years. And no other disbalances, balance of payment was still stable, low unemployment and nothing. So that was, I would say, really, I was surprised, I must admit. As a professor, you know, you're teaching something. But then when usually my father said, he said, this is theory, but in practice it's completely different, you know. So I was surprised how well the theory actually worked in practice. And this set us on the course to take over Euro first.
Professor, it was very useful to have an experienced macroeconomic professor in charge of these complicated negotiations. I'm sure about it.
Yeah, I was very tough. They were afraid that I will be very unhappy because I showed them when I was unhappy. And I still remember we had those negotiations sometime in spring. And then there was a celebration of a new year of 2004, and members or representatives of labor unions came, and they came to me, and I said, would you give us, would you shake the hand with us, in spite of the fact that we didn't actually allow that much as you required, you know, of, let's say, reducing the increase of wages. And I said, okay, I will shake your hand, but be on our side when we're entering European Union and Euro, because we will need you. And we shaked our hands. They were really afraid of me at that time.
Professor, you were under pressure both from the IMF and from the trade unions, but your academic knowledge and wisdom led to this, your country towards the success in the historic year of 2004. You were, this is quite historic year, NATO membership, EU membership, and the European Monetary Exchange Mechanism as well. What a historic year to celebrate 17 years ago. And thanks also, can you describe how it felt to be in the government, to lead this process and to achieve so much for your nation?
Not so well, I would say. It was very difficult. And I must say, I was the last one who said, okay, let's go on the path of entering Europe. Yeah, because we were so far, you know, we had high inflation and we needed to sort of maintain our competitiveness. And if you fix exchange rate with such high inflation, of course, you're losing competitiveness. And I was afraid that we are entering Euro too early, and that we would need still some time actually to have all these adjustments made, and that we would be harmonized with Euro area well enough so that we wouldn't be losing competitiveness anymore. So everybody, the governor of central bank, the prime minister, the president of the republic, were sort of waiting whether I would say yes or no for ERM2, and then of course Euro path in 2007. And I was the last one, and I was really worried that we would go too fast, and that we would be, you know, because of that, we would reduce our GDP growth and the employment and so on. But it turned out very well. So my pressure on one side actually cooled those aspirations, let's say, to increase the prices when there was no tradable sector, let's say like in monopolies, and especially government monopolies. So it seems that everything worked very well. And this dollar euro switch in June was done, I would say, on a professional level, which was, I was really astonished. Especially I was surprised by journalists. Journalists knew what will be the exchange rate from dollar to euro on the 28th of June, when we will sort of fix the exchange rate, you know. But they shouldn't tell anyone, and no one in newspapers or on the television should sort of reveal this number, because that could jeopardize actually our entry into ERM2 and then Euro. And every single journalist promised that they will not, that we informed them upfront, but they promised that they will not reveal this information, and nobody did. So it was really something, you know, like the whole nation was working for it. So that was quite, I would say, good feeling.
Absolutely, imagine. And 2007, then Slovenia was the first nation of the new countries of 2004, which joined the Eurozone, also a historic achievement.
Definitely true. However, but we have to be very careful with that, because when we entered the European Union, we entered NATO, and then there was prospect that we will enter also Euro as first country, you know. Slovenia was put on the map as a very successful country, And on top of that, we had some special saving schemes for apartments, for young people especially, which just came into play. You know, this was a saving scheme, and they just were released in order for those youngsters to buy their new apartments or to invest into their houses and so on. So that was additional money supply, or that was there for the demand. So we had huge inflow from abroad, huge, I would say, consumer confidence and investors' confidence in Slovenia. And that put a huge pressure actually on Slovenia and on the economy. So it was completely overheated. Let's say we increased foreign debt in the period from 2005 to 2008, when this crisis struck. 160% of foreign debt increased. Our government debt increased from 27 to 82% at the peak. So on one side, it was really fantastic, but on the other side, that was such a pressure on our economy that we indebted ourselves way too much. Government was also carried away with all these successes, and they were leading expansionary economic policy while they should be sort of cooling down the economy. And of course, we paid for that. We paid for that coincidence actually of all these factors with very bad position actually when the crisis hit in 2008 and especially in 2009 for Slovenia.
Professor Mramor, the situation, I read in the run-up of this interview, also the paper you gave me. You are also the president of a think tank for the most important think tank of your country, from the Slovenian Managers Association. And you refer, to me surprisingly, to a so-called lost decade. And you warn very much that this fiscal instability has started in 2004, actually. Can you explain a little bit where all this euphoria of 2004 has led then to this lost decade, in your opinion?
Yes, as I said before, it was the consequence of really positive prior results, let's say in the 90s and the beginning of 2000s. Slovenia really fared, I would say, as you said, it was a benchmark of how do you have to carry out economic policies. But then when we entered the Euro area, then everything actually was relaxed. People really enjoyed it. Something that was a golden sort of goal was reached, and prudence, that was very important part of economic policy before 2004 or 2007, was lost. Government wanted to invest into new highways, into all sorts of public expenditure was increased because economic policies were relaxed, but they shouldn't be. Also, taxes were reduced in this period. So I would say this is 10 years of lost 10 years, which started in 2005 actually, and it was really a pity, I would say. And I came, of course, the first time I was finance minister, I came with high inflation and very expansionary policy. But second time in 2014, I came back again to do sort of corrections in our economic system to get out of the crisis. And this was unfortunate, I would say.
Professor, you're referring to tax reform in 2005 and 6, that it was quite significant. But I've checked also in the run-up of the interview, the tax system of Slovenia is quite similar to Austria. You have progressive tax system with up to 50%. You have 19% of corporation tax. What was the nature of this tax reform, and why were you skeptical about it?
not that much in the structure of this tax reform, more into the moment when you do it, when you have completely overheated economy, when you don't have under control anymore, when inflation went up to 7 point and something percent, when balance of payment is becoming highly negative. And then when you reduce also the taxes, you're just like throwing gasoline on the fire. And that was my point. Not that much, the structure. Yes, structure we have, I would say structure could be improved because we too heavily tax labor, and we do not tax enough like real estate and let's say some other elements, which some other revenues that could be taxed more. So I would say there is some room for improvement and for increasing competitiveness with reducing personal taxes or labor taxes and tax more, especially real estate. But that was not the biggest problem. The biggest problem was, when do you reduce taxes? When do you take credits abroad and build highways and so on? You don't do that when you have completely overheated economy. You do that when you are in crisis and you need the demand from the government.
Professor, some countries in Eastern Europe, in Southeastern Europe, like for example, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Romania, they have reduced the tax rate very competitive to 10% income and corporate. But you have never done it actually. Why was the reason for that?
Actually, it's not really the case, because yes, we had 17, 19, 21% of corporate tax rate. However, we had huge tax relief for investments in general, and especially for investments in research and development. So the effective corporate tax rate was between 11 and 12%. So we were not that far away, and we were competitive enough. And as I said before, Slovenian export sector especially was very competitive. We had this balance of payments surpluses, which were huge. So this was not that important as, let's say, for Macedonia or for Kosovo or Serbia also. Yeah.
Professor, in 2008 came the great financial crisis and it hit the whole world very hard. What was the effect of the great financial crisis in September 2008 on the Slovenian economy?
Disasters. We had huge drop in GDP. We actually practically lost during the course of this crisis access to financial markets. We did access it, but interest rates were extremely high. Our rating went down considerably, and we increased our indebtedness to 82% when I took over again in 2014. 2015, we had 82% of GDP government debt, because government was actually taking over the debt of the business sector. And business sector before that went with indebtedness way above the European average, EU average. So that, of course, affected the banks, which, because of so many companies went under, banks' balance sheets were in bad situation. We had to capitalize the banks, and we had to privatize the banks on a very, I would say, small prices, low prices. So we suffered tremendously because of this prior crisis wrong macroeconomic policies. They were responsible for what we had to do. After you are in a trouble, and you are indebted, then of course you have to really be smart how to get out of such a situation. And this is where we excelled. We went out really perfectly, but we paid for it dearly. I would just say something which is here important. The new government that came into place in 2008 started with counter policies which were correct. And what they did, if you are in a recession, you have to try, from the government point of view, you have to counter-cyclically help the economy with demand. And Slovenian government did that. And also you have to help businesses actually to survive and help banks. And they did, and they took over quite a lot of credits and so on. But then the government changed, and we got a new government in 2012, which started completely the opposite. In a very difficult crisis situation, this government actually started leading austerity policy. And that killed actually Slovenia. That was 2012. And in 2013, we were on the brink of Troika, and we were indebted a lot. We had very limited access to financial markets and so on. So when the next government came, they changed a bit, but they were already under the pressure of austerity and fiscal rules, which were changed at that time, if you remember. We got the 2-pack, 6-pack, and so on, which actually required austerity measures. But austerity at the time when Slovenia was on the W path, and we were still in very deep crisis, was very detrimental for the macroeconomic situation. So when I came in 2014, I had to think how to get out of this mess a lot. I was preparing myself for that position, I don't know, I think 2-3 months studying. In 3 weeks, I was just talking to the finance minister I was replacing, what they did, what was the logic, and so on, where are the problems. And then I designed actually an economic policy which really worked.
Professor, in 2011 started the Greek debt crisis. It's obviously more well known, but the Slovenian banking crisis was the second biggest crisis in European economic history in that time. Can you describe the nature of that crisis? What really happened, how it was handled, and what was the nature of the Slovenian banking and debt crisis of 2011?
Actually, it was not 2011 that we had this banking crisis. It hit later on in 2012, as I said, when the government actually started to, new government that came in started using austerity measures, very strict austerity measures. And then they were also reducing the confidence of consumers and investors by saying that we need Troika and so on. I would say if in this time we had better economic policies, we would get out of this crisis, or this general crisis, with very little troubles. It would be really a smooth path out. But wrong economic measures actually led us to the situation where it seemed like our banks are really undercapitalized and so on. We see now that we capitalized them too much in that period.
How expensive was the cost of that banking crisis in terms of GDP for the Slovenian state?
Oh, I don't have, we did calculate that, you know, but I do not have it here, the calculations. They were in the range definitely of 10 to 15% of GDP, if not even more. So that was, wrong policies can lead really to disasters. And let's say, just one number, in year 2014, I think, yeah, it was 2014, our youth unemployment was 22.5%. And that's a disaster for the economy. If you think, you know, or not just for the economy, for the society. You have all these youngsters, you know, who study like crazy, who go abroad to get experiences, who really do everything to be prepared to enter the labor market and then to contribute and to prosper. And they are there waiting at home with their parents, you know, every fourth youngster. So this was a disaster. And when I came in second time, as a professor, you know, I tried to give them everything I can, you know, all the international connections, send them here, send them there, get them international best professors here and so on. And now I can see them sitting at home with their parents and without any future. So it was a big cost actually. But we went down in 2 years. I became finance minister again in 2014. In 2 years, we were already down a lot, half of that, I think. So right policies, I learned it from the right economic policies lead you far, but wrong ones are even worse, you know. They actually get you far, but far down.
Professor, in 2014, you brought macroeconomic reason and science back in the Ministry of Finance. What was your first measures to undertake as the Minister of Finance in 2014? How could you bring the Slovenian economy back to a growth path and reduce unemployment and bring growth back to Slovenia?
Okay, it was a situation where everybody was expecting that because I took over again, and they remembered me from the first time when we had overheated economy and I went in with very strict austerity measures. Now everybody was expecting that Mramor, when he would come, it would be austerity again. Of course, there was Wolfgang Schäuble at the Euro group and ECOFIN, who was requiring tough fiscal policies, not to get too much in debt and so on, and have fiscal space for the crisis and so on. And this was reflected actually on our position. Our position was such that the European Commission was requiring, in accordance with fiscal rules, which we had to put into the constitution even, that we lead austerity policy. When I came in and I said, we must not lead austerity policy at this moment, because what we need is support actually. And I tried to figure out where we could find demand that would support economy, that would start growing, and with growth of the economy, we would be reducing our indebtedness in GDP. We would be reducing also our deficit in GDP, not by reducing in nominal terms how much we spend, or on the other side, you know, how much in nominal terms we have debt, but in relative terms, to comparing with GDP, if GDP grows very fast, of course, then the percentage of debt in GDP is reduced. And this is what I opted for with my advisors. I had fantastic advisor in Vilko Bole and my colleagues from the school. Vilko Bole is a very special person. He was named from the IMF, the guru of Slovenian economic advice. And whenever the IMF came to Slovenia, they wanted to talk to him because he was the best forecaster also. Now, so I tried to design where can we find these reserves which we can use to support growth of the economy, and through growth we can actually then sort out these balances which are there. So first thing that came to our hand was not all EU funds were used by the end of this the financial perspective. So we had there a reserve, I think, around 1.5% of GDP of EU funds. So what I said, EU funds has to be completely up to the last euro used, because there was a line when they should be used and then you lose them. So EU funds were really good, demand area where we could increase the demand. Second one was, European Commission was completely against what I was doing at the beginning. Then we sort of agreed that we are going into the right direction. And they asked us to increase our austerity and fiscal targets. That means reducing budget deficit and reducing indebtedness by big numbers. That would, of course, reduce the demand in Slovenia, and we would be on a spiral down, not up. So I just told them, I will do the adjustments which are in line with fiscal rules and not a euro more. We are going for expansionary as much as possible fiscal policy within this fiscal space that we have. So I didn't want to reduce public spending to reduce budget deficit. Third thing, household sector was, our household sector is the least indebted in European Union. So there is potential for demand. And what we did, actually, I said, you can release some of these savings that would flow into the businesses and help to increase GDP if we actually get consumer confidence back. And we did all sorts of things. Let's say one was, I still remember, we were negotiating with labor unions, and it was just time before Christmas. And they were very hard negotiators. They wanted a lot, actually, of increase in wages and all sorts of other benefits. And I was really against it. And if it wouldn't be that time before Christmas, I wouldn't go for it. But they did step back, but a little, and we wanted them more. But at a certain moment, I said, let's stop here. It was just before Christmas. Shake hands, increase wages, and tell people, labor unions got increase. We think that we can survive with this increase like it was agreed upon. So what was on the TV just before Christmas, shaking hands of austerity Mramor with the labor union. And that really helped that people relaxed. And consumer confidence actually increased the demand, household demand. And that was another area where we actually got economy going. And then another one was restructuring of investments. We put money into the wrong investments, which didn't support the growth of GDP. So I said that we should restructure investments. We should pour into hydro, electrical power, and into railways and so on, that would actually support the growth of the economy. So what we achieved was very quick. GDP growth already in 2014, 4 and something percent. Employment of youth, unemployment of youth went down like a stone. Budget deficit was being reduced. Interest rates came down. Our rating went up. And in 2016 and 17, we had first surplus in budget. So if you think 17 versus 14, in 14 it looked like we will get troika. In 17 we had already surplus, high growth, and so on. So what I learned, if you carry out right economic policies, you can achieve fantastic results.
Professor, let me ask about the political framework, because in two different situations, you as a macroeconomic professor were thrown into the Ministry of Finance. You responded differently to both different situations, correctly according to macroeconomic science, but it was obviously difficult to politically implement it because people might have been surprised, you know, and how did you manage to build a political consensus for two different macroeconomic reform concepts in the complicated Slovenian context? It's quite surprising and it's quite historic.
The first time, actually, I had all the support of my prime minister, which was really important at that time. And I must say, it was hard, but it was not that hard because there was entry into European Union goal and then NATO and also Euro takeovers. Slovenians, the highest percentage of Slovenians, if you compare countries of the European Union, the highest percentage of Slovenians asked for euro, wanted euro. So there were two, let's say, from the economic policy, very important goals, and this is euro entry and EU entry. And of course, when I said we will not be able to enter European Union, or we will not be able to enter euro area if we don't do this and this, they went along because this was such a golden goal for Slovenians. It was very important. So first time I had prime minister and I had actually, you know, very strong arguments in my hands to push through what was necessary. This was the first time. Okay, the second time, you're right. The second time it was really difficult. Although, you know, you should never forego the opportunity that the crisis brings. This is what is the rule in government. So I was using actually what could happen if we don't do it, but many times they didn't listen. It was much more difficult political situation. I myself, I'm not politician. I was never member of any party. I didn't run for the position. I was actually asked to be both times sort of technical finance minister. So I didn't have personal access actually to those talks between political parties of position and opposition. So yeah, that was not an easy task.
But you managed so well. Professor?
Yes.
Your camera is disconnected. If you can connect it again.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. I will ask you about the Eurozone, because in your paper, you're also relatively critical to the design of the Eurozone. And you say, despite it being a wonderful thing, the external shocks in the periphery is not really very well designed, the response answer of the European system, of the Eurozone system. Can you elaborate a bit about this approach of yours, and what would you recommend for peripheral economies, in smaller economies, let's call it like this, in the Eurozone, how to respond to shocks? Professor? It's recording, just the camera is temporarily unavailable. Professor? I cannot hear you. I cannot see you. I hope the professor is coming back in a second. Please bear with me for a moment, some technical glitch, and there will be the question about the Eurozone once the professor is back. I hope he will enter the room soon, and there will be continuation of our excellent interview on the Slovenian economy with Professor Mramor. He is the leading macroeconomist in Slovenia, 30 years of professor at the University of Slovenia, twice in the Ministry of Finance, always a non-political expert, bringing excellent macroeconomic advice towards the high politics, and having this opportunity task obligation. It was certainly not easy to reform the Slovenian economy in these two historic moments, in the run-up of the 2004 membership, and also in the moment after the Slovenian banking and debt crisis. He has done excellent, and I hope he will be back very soon with us on air, and I'm confident he will. And I will send him, of course, another invitation to find him again. Yes, it's always on air and always surprising, and there's always something happening. Maybe the internet connection with Slovenia is not perfect right now, but I sent him another link, and let's see if we can get him back to discuss the continuous situation of the Slovenian economic model and how to converge, because I hope that Slovenia will overtake and converge to reach 100% of the GDP average. That would be obviously perfect, and that would be the next level of success. And that's obviously my next question, also about labor productivity, tax rates, and how to really then manage ahead. And that's very good. Professor, you're back. Perfect. Professor, you are connected? Professor? Excellent. Professor is back. I think you can hear me now. I hope so. And I hope that we have full connection very soon again with the leading macroeconomist professor of Slovenia, twice Minister of Finance of Slovenia, and also the leading crisis manager in many ways. Historic personality. Professor Mramor has led his country into the EMR2, into NATO, into the Eurozone, and also has contributed massively with the managing of the crisis, leading Slovenia out of the banking crisis, and was rewarded. I have not mentioned that up to now, but as the best Minister of Finance, according to the Banker magazine. That was, of course, very special in 2016. And that's a special award he has very well received for all his historic achievements. Absolutely. Just we hope to have him back very soon, also on air. Professor, do you hear me?
Yes, I do. Do you hear me?
Yes, very good. Welcome back, Professor. We have no video, but no matter, don't worry. Please, my question was about the Eurozone, about your critical point about the design for the Eurozone concerning periphery economies, smaller economies, and the external shocks. What's your recommendation? Yeah. What's your experience?
The problem is that swings of economic activity are much bigger in peripheral countries than in core countries. Let's say when Germany has plus minus 2% in a more serious crisis, Slovenia has plus minus 5%. So these cycles, economic cycles, are much more pronounced in peripheral countries because of their structure of the economy. Let's say there's more tourism, there's more parts produced for final production in core countries and so on. And that, of course, is a big problem when you have the central bank's policy, monetary policy, focused on core countries. So it is appropriate for Germany, Austria, France, and so on. But this monetary policy is not appropriate, let's say, for peripheral countries, which would need much more reaction by the monetary policy. But of course, in such a monetary area as euro is, it is logical that the central bank is actually trying to figure out what is, how to react with its policy for the most important part of the euro area, which is Germany, of course, and France, and so on. So monetary policy, as it is now, it is not correct one for peripheral countries. And second, fiscal policy, where fiscal policies would need to have much more freedom, much more reaction, let's say, to the crisis or to the upswing than it is now with all these fiscal rules. This is you would need much more fiscal space, as it is called, in order for countries to intervene and have more fiscal support of the economy, or cooling down with fiscal austerity when it is necessary. So both economic policies that are now either coordinated, which is fiscal policy, which is coordinated, or which is actually led by the central bank, the monetary authority, both these policies are inappropriate for countries which you consider they are peripheral countries. Okay, this is first thing. The second thing which I was really pointing out, and that was actually understood at the end by the European Commission and Eurogroup. The second point is that fiscal rules as they are with this GDP gap calculated, so the difference between potential and actual GDP growth and level, that this is theoretically, empirically, inappropriate measure of where we are in the cycle and whether the country is having too expansionary or too restrictive fiscal policy. We know that for years, let's say for 2-3 years in advance, when you get 3 years, let's say in advance, you can calculate approximately what was the position of this country 3 years ago. But today, when you're calculating, the difference between what you calculate and what is actual is so big that this measure doesn't actually help you in any way. So using methodology for calculating where the country is, whether it is leading correct fiscal policies or not in accordance with fiscal rules, is wrong. And this showed, let's say, for Slovenia, and this was, I think, 2016. When using this methodology, the final result was Slovenia is overheating and Slovenia should use austerity measures in fiscal policy actually to cool down the economy. But I said, this is not logical. We have higher unemployment that should be there. We have inflation, which is very low, practically no inflation, and so on. I went with the macroeconomic indicators, and I showed, no, Slovenian economy is not overheating, it is in recession. And the difference was so big that we would have to, in accordance with this methodology, reduce our government spending. And if we would do that, we would kill the economy in 2016. So when we had these ECOFIN meetings and Eurogroup meetings, I tried to persuade, the European Commission and the leadership of Eurogroup that this methodology gives completely wrong result for Slovenia and that we will really be in trouble if we follow it. So the final result was that they acknowledged that Slovenia is not in overheating because balance of payment is still positive, long-term investments are too low, and so on. And they treated Slovenia specially. But what I was proposing was that we change completely, you know, the way we are calculating where you are, and have much simpler and better fiscal rules, measures, or methodologies than what we have at the moment.
Professor, you are talking about a very specific targeted approach from the EU and the member states of the Eurozone in order to address the specific economic situation more targeted. This is what you recommend?
Yes, I recommend that we change methodologies for calculating whether you are calculating your fiscal policies and calculating how much you should actually do fiscal effort. Fiscal effort means how much you have to reduce your, let's say, budget deficit in a specific year. Let's say for Slovenia in 2016, there was a fiscal effort of 1.2% of GDP. So it said that Slovenia should reduce budget deficit in 2016 by 1.2% GDP, which is huge reduction actually. When you look at what the reduction, you know, what are those numbers which you usually use? Let's say 0.5% would be acceptable, but 1.2 would really kill the economy.
Professor, in your paper, you are quite not satisfied with the progress of Slovenia in terms of convergence with the European Union average. And despite the fact that Slovenia is the most successful of all the new countries, it has a $26,000 GDP per capita in net terms, and it's actually closing up towards Italy. And maybe, I don't know what is your estimation when Slovenia will have reached Italy, but still you're not satisfied. What is your critical point on that?
Okay, now you got me. We Slovenians are always unhappy. We say, we don't look at Italy, we don't look at Czech Republic, so we look at Slovenia and say, okay, this was the opportunity, this much we could do, but we didn't. So we lost it. Yes, others made mistakes also. Yeah, that's true. But I'm not looking at your mistakes. I'm looking at my mistakes and try to get and squeeze out the most we can.
So when do you think Slovenia will have caught up with Italy in terms of GDP per capita?
Well, that was my dream. When I was finance minister, I said, we have to catch them. We are on a good path. The difference is still quite considerable. If you think about it, they are around 95% of EU average. We are at around 87, 88%. So it's not so easy actually to close this gap. And it depends what Draghi will do, you know, because you have Draghi there and he's a very good economist. So I have confidence that he will change the way that Italy was dealing with their problems. But what I can say is that if you look at the quality of life indicators, not the GDP in purchasing power parity, but let's say that you look at those measures, that we are already in front of Italy.
So now, that's an amazing achievement. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, of course, there's a lot of measurements of quality of life, of well-being, and so on. And they produce very different results. But I would say that Slovenia has high quality of life, very high quality of life. We are just bragging, no, we are just unhappy all the time because we think that we don't have good enough quality of life and we should do better. So, but that, you know, I don't know whether you are aware of our great philosopher, Zizek, who had also this very famous debate with Peterson. And he said that the happiest people so far were in Czechoslovakia. And the question was, you know, during when they were actually in Warsaw Pact. And the question was, why are they so happy about? Because material, of course, level of living is much lower than, let's say, in Austria and in other countries. And the sort of explanation was that whatever goes wrong in Czechoslovakia, who is to blame? Either government or Russians. They are never to be blamed for it. And, you know,
it's still the same. It's still the same.
It's still the same. So, but in Slovenia, everything what we blame for is government. Government didn't do that. The government didn't do that. So this is very happy life from this perspective.
Professor, as long as you don't blame it on the Austrians, it's fully fine for me.
No, we don't blame it for Austrians.
Thanks a lot. We have been together many centuries, and you are like our sister, our brotherly nation. We love Slovenia very much. And we also feel the pain. You're also very hurt now by the Corona crisis. Let me ask you about the current economic shock we face with the debt crisis and the Corona crisis. What is your economic perspective? How should the government respond? And what is now in 2021 the right economic policy according to Professor Mramor? What needs to be the response macroeconomically to this very strange and terrible shock of Corona crisis 2021? Please.
I must say that I'm very happy that finally European Union reacted from the economic point of view correctly. Because with previous crises, there was austerity when we should support the economy. And before it was just the opposite. We were overheating the economy, but this time all European countries and also around the world actually used the right policy, macroeconomic policy, which actually helped to maintain workplaces, who maintained certain businesses, and so on. So the macroeconomic approach was the correct one concerning direction. In such a situation, you need, because this is completely one-time huge external shock, and you should help this shock not to destroy your economic base. So this was done correctly also in Slovenia. Of course, million-dollar question is, did we go too far? Because in Slovenia, we went so far that we are a bit less feeling the effect of the Corona crisis than the average EU country, which in accordance with what I said before, when I said that swings of economic activity in peripheral country like Slovenia are bigger than the swings in core countries. So if average is, let's say that there was a lost 5% drop of GDP in EU, and it was 5.5, and in Slovenia was 5.4. It means that we were stronger with measures than, let's say, the average of the European Union. But what does it mean, stronger with stronger? It means that you actually took more credits, indebted yourself as a country more than others did. And the question then is, how will we survive after this crisis is over and after we will try to handle the debt that will be left after all our interventions? So whether this debt will be more pronounced or less pronounced, or whether we will be able to handle it. Now, this is one way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it is, how far did we get with debt in the first, this big financial crisis? We went up to 82.5%, somewhere 82.3%. And we survived with that, but barely. Now we are expecting to get to 82 point something% also. So the consequence of intervention of government into the businesses and into the lives actually of every citizen, with getting actually credit abroad and supporting this part of the economy, will lead to increase of government debt to 82 point something%. If we survive the financial crisis for the first time, we will survive with that also now, because everybody will have much higher indebtedness of government than before, because everybody is supporting with 10 to 20% of GDP to the business sector and other sectors of the economy. So in this respect, as a country, we will probably manage that with not too much troubles. However, what about the whole global economy? You know, are we going too far? Are there risks that we were not thinking about? I'm sure there are risks which are now hidden because, you know, there is a constant flow of money from the government to support sectors like tourism, like, I don't know, big events, organizers and so on, who are without jobs and without actually income for 1 year and something already. Will this lead to defaults and then to bank problems and so on? I'm afraid that we are a bit too easy about it generally, and I would rather have a bit less of debt on the heads of governments than what we have today.
Professor, now it's at 82, the debt level of Slovenia. Do you see any reserves, for example, with privatization to reduce the debt level of Slovenia in the future?
No, 82 will be at the end of the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It's not 82 yet. Good. We are still down because we were before, we had up until 2019, we had 3 times, 17, 18, 19, we had surplus in budget. And that led to the drop of GDP, debt in GDP to below 70%. And now it's going up to 82. So it will be around, I think, 15% increase. In this respect, you are talking about privatization, whether with privatization we could actually reduce our indebtedness. Not much though, because more or less this financial crisis we had actually led to, I would say, the most important parts of the economy are already privatized. There is still some, but I don't think that anybody would be very happy because they are very strategic investments for the government, like, let's say, an energy sector. We have electricity and, let's say, oil company. Then this probably you want to have to a certain extent under control for the country. Then you have in financial sector, very little to be in the hands of the government. There is the bank, which has still 51% or 50.5%. That's NLB. And then you have insurance business, which is still in our hands. But that, I think, is already a big minority of the whole investment in the financial sector. And I think that every government wants to have this as a strategic. And then you have railways, you know, and such things that I don't think that there is much left for reading. If it will be really necessary, of course, you can sell this, but I'm not very positive about it.
And in terms of tax reform, tax cuts, for example, to reduce the income taxation system to give more purchasing power to the people, is this an option which you would recommend?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Our government is actually doing this now. They are proposing a decrease of personal taxation, for personal income tax, and also some other adjustments which would reduce the tax burden, because this is right government and of course, you know, philosophy of right governments. I'm not very sure that at the time when we are getting so much credit, when we are increasing our indebtedness by so much, that you go and you decrease the taxes, I'm not sure that this will be positive.
In general, Professor, what's your recommendation? What is now, it's a complicated situation macroeconomically. The question is how really to stimulate the economy in 2021 and put it back on a growth path. What would be your academic advice for the Slovenian government? Maybe, I don't know, maybe they will call you back, Professor. It's the third time you have to save Slovenia. It's also an option.
No, no third time. Okay. I would say we have a good situation here because of what I said before, because of the correct reaction of European Union as a whole. So we have this EU funds, you know, for this very specific situation, which can be used actually to support the growth. And we just handed in yesterday our plan, how we will spend this allocated EU funds specifically for corona crisis. And here, I think if we do it correctly, and we do it in the way that also we invest where the multiplier of GDP multiplier is the highest. And as I looked at it, of course, there are certain limitations by where you can invest, you know, which actually prevent us to invest only in those areas where we would have the biggest effect. But still, let's say like railways, hydropower plants, also digitalization. If you do it correctly, you can actually support the growth and so on. So I think that using this wisely up to the level which was given to Slovenia or approved for Slovenia, that this is a solution.
So you promote more infrastructure building in Slovenia now with the EU funding of SURE and of the recovery fund?
You know, this is the question also that is raised in Bulgaria and Romania. I just read about it this morning. They said that, of course, every other country, let's say core country, did use previous financial perspectives money for infrastructure, for high-speed trains, for, you know, for also the network, electrical network and so on. While our countries didn't do that. So when you compare now level of development of, let's say, railway system in Slovenia with Austria, it's a huge difference. So Romania said that they are losing 2.2% of GDP per year because they have such a gap, let's say, in the development of infrastructure. So I would definitely say that there should be more leeway actually for countries to decide themselves whether they will put, I don't know, 26% or 30% in digitalization or 25%. 5% would be added to what they can do in railway system.
We have a new tunnel soon ready in Austria, a railway tunnel from Graz to Klagenfurt, the so-called Koralm project, which is in 4 years, I think it will be ready. It's a huge 5 billion euro investment. And, you know, we don't have really very efficient railway links up to now. No high-speed railway from Vienna to Ljubljana and something like this. Is this something you would recommend, to have a high-speed railway to connect to Vienna, for example?
Definitely. Now, whether to Vienna or through Salzburg to Munich, you know, probably both would be necessary. And we are now going and trying to upgrade, but not the way that you're doing it. You have a tunnel now there through where you before went up and down like crazy. If I understand, when I went from Graz to Klagenfurt, it was a big mountain up and down. Now, not like that, but just upgrade and put the second track also in, because let's say Ljubljana, Jesenice, Karavanke. We have just one track. We don't have two-track railway. Can you imagine that? The one that is the most important, and Orient Express actually went through it, and then Karavanke and then Villach and Salzburg, Munich, and further. So we need a lot of money actually to upgrade our railway system. And yes, we would need that also with Vienna. But then there's a question whether high speed to Vienna and then high speed to Salzburg, or would you just go directly from Vienna to Salzburg? So that you would go to Vienna and then to Salzburg with 300 kilometers per hour. You would be there in 1 hour in Vienna and then 1 hour in Salzburg.
We are just spending 10 billion euros to build the Brenner Basis tunnel from Innsbruck to Italy. It's also a huge European funded project, but we have not connected so well to Slovenia. And for example, I, as an economist here in Austria, I think it would be extremely beneficial to connect Germany with Slovenia and to cross the Alps diagonal in order to build this connection also to Turkey, obviously, and to the Balkans. I think it would be wonderful to do it, but there is no political will for such a big project still in Slovenia, in the EU, and in Austria, and in Germany. But I think it would be very beneficial.
As much as I know is that they have started their discussions and that they are forming international actually alliances. Let's say our railway authority or railway company with your railway company and also with Slovakian and Hungarian and Czech. And they want to promote, and I would really recommend that, much tighter connections. And of course, it has to be also the same kind of speed. Let's say this 10-10, requirements should be met. And I would really support that. I think we are here, we have Port of Koper, which really needs very fast connections, but then also going green. Also, you would like to get as many people as possible on the trains for passenger freight. So yeah, that I would support that. I think it is going into the right direction.
Professor, one last question. When will Slovenia overtake Austria in GDP per capita?
Okay. I have very specific answer to that, very precise. You already mentioned that I'm leading a group. Sorry. I'm leading a group of a think tank, actually, which tries to design measures which will, in 4 years, bring productivity of Slovenia on the level of productivity of Austria. This is how sorry, I do not interpret it, what we do in this way, but the minister who was looking, Minister of Economy, who was looking at our work said, yeah, Mramor is producing measures that will get us on the level with Austria in 4 years. So if you would listen to our economy minister, we're there in 4 years, no problem. Of course, we as a think tank, we know that this is completely impossible because Austria has 50% higher productivity than Slovenia. And to achieve, such a, to actually close such a gap, it will take, I don't know, 12, 15 years if we do not have one more 10-year loss.
I hope that you will be very successful, Professor. I'm of course for Austria, but I'm for competition, absolutely. And I love Slovenia very much. And I wish you very success also that convergence will come and that the Slovenian economic miracle will continue. I would like to thank you now very much. And I'm very honored that you took time to discuss and present this amazing achievement of yours and also the Slovenian economic miracle of the last 30 years and this amazing success model of European unification and of the euro. I'm very grateful that you took time, Professor, and all the best for the future development and to catch up with Austria very fast. Please.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot. Best regards to Slovenia and all the best in the catch up.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.